I never thought my own daughter-in-law could be this cruel. She told me I was too poor to see my own grandchildren. Every holiday, every birthday, I was locked out. I cried, begged, but she didn't care. Little did she know I had one card left to play, and it would change everything. The rain pounded against the window as Margaret sat alone at her kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. The morning light did little to brighten the heaviness that had settled in her chest. She clutched a faded photograph of her grandchildren, Emily and Jacob, smiling on the lawn last summer, the memory bittersweet because she hadn't seen them in months, not since Laura, her son's wife, had told her with that cold, measured tone she would never forget. "You're too poor to be around them. Stay out of their lives." Margaret's hands trembled as she set the photo down. She had raised her son David with love and patience, had been the one who taught him to ride a bike, to tie his shoes, to dream bigger than she ever could. And now, Laura, the woman she had welcomed into her home, whose family she had hosted countless holidays, was telling her she wasn't welcome in her grandchildren's lives. The betrayal cut deeper than Margaret could have imagined. She remembered the first time Laura had questioned her parenting advice, the subtle digs at her life choices, the comments about her small retirement savings. At first, Margaret brushed it off, thinking perhaps she was being sensitive. But over time, the jabs had become sharper, louder, and then finally, cruelly definitive. David, her son, had tried to stay neutral. "Mom, let's just give it time," he had said one night, rubbing her shoulder while she cried into his shirt. "Laura's just stressed about the house and the kids." But Margaret knew better. Deep down, she knew Laura was deliberately keeping her away, rewriting the rules of family on her own terms. She thought about the holidays she'd missed, Emily's first recital, Jacob's 8th birthday party, Thanksgiving dinners where her empty chair mocked her absence. And the casual cruelty of it all made her blood boil, not in a way that screamed or shouted, but in a quiet, burning way that whispered, "One day you'll see. One day they'll regret this." Margaret had always been smart. She had quietly managed her finances over decades, investing in a few properties she had inherited and flipping them at the right moments. What Laura didn't know was that Margaret had more than enough to ensure her security and, more importantly, enough leverage for the future. It started with the legal papers. Margaret spent weeks quietly consulting with her lawyer, revising her will and trust documents. She would make sure that when the time came, her assets, her home, her savings, everything would reflect one simple rule. Only the people who treated her grandchildren and herself with respect would inherit. Laura, who had turned her away, would find herself completely excluded. But Margaret wasn't planning to rush justice. She wanted this to simmer. She wanted the cold realization to land slowly, painfully, when Laura least expected it. In the meantime, she had to survive the daily emotional assaults. Laura's phone calls were polite, but filled with thinly veiled criticism. Birthday invitations arrived, carefully worded to exclude Margaret. And David, ever loyal, struggled to balance his mother's pain with his wife's demands. One evening, as Margaret sat by the fireplace, she whispered to herself, "You will never take my love away from my grandchildren. You will never erase me. And one day, you'll see what it costs to treat family this way." That whisper was the beginning of something more than revenge. It was the birth of a plan that would give Margaret back her power and dignity. And in the quiet moments before bed, she allowed herself a tiny smile, imagining Laura's expression the day she realized that wealth and influence could not erase the consequences of cruelty. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, but Margaret felt a flicker of hope. She would not just endure, she would prevail. And the first step was patience, the kind that builds tension, sharpens awareness, and prepares for the ultimate reveal. As she closed her eyes that night, the words of her lawyer echoed in her head. "Every step you take now can be strategic. Timing, Margaret, timing is everything." And she knew with quiet certainty that her time was coming. Welcome to Voice Revenge Story. If you love seeing justice served cold, hit that subscribe button. Weeks turned into months, and Margaret's life settled into a quiet rhythm. She attended community events, volunteered at the library, and spent what little time she could with friends who valued her presence. Yet her thoughts always returned to Emily and Jacob and to the injustice that Laura had imposed. One afternoon, David arrived at Margaret's house, visibly anxious. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, pacing in the living room. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "It's about Laura and the house. Something's wrong, and I think you should know." Margaret motioned him to sit. She sensed the tension before he spoke, a problem bigger than usual, something even she hadn't anticipated. "Laura, she's in trouble," David began. "The renovation she did on our new home, they cut corners. There's a major leak, and it's going to cost a fortune to fix. We don't have the insurance coverage." Margaret listened quietly, nodding. Inside, she felt a pang of sympathy for her son, but only briefly. She also felt a flicker of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, was nudging things in her favor. Days later, a letter arrived at Margaret's home, a formal notice from a law firm representing Laura's family. Margaret's eyes widened as she read the words. The insurance claim had been denied because of negligence, and Laura was financially liable. This twist was unexpected. Margaret could have intervened, offering help or advice, but she stayed silent. She watched the drama unfold from a distance, like an audience in a theater, knowing that her careful planning was about to pay off. Meanwhile, Margaret's lawyer finalized the revisions to her will. Laura would be explicitly excluded. Emily and Jacob, however, would remain her beloved beneficiaries. She made a mental note to ensure David fully understood the reasoning behind this decision, but only when the time was right. Then came the family gathering that Laura had orchestrated, attempting to prove her dominance over the family. Margaret attended quietly, smiling politely, but remaining unobtrusive. She watched as Laura flaunted her wealth, bragged about recent purchases, and subtly mocked Margaret in front of the children. At that moment, something shifted. Margaret realized the true power of restraint. She didn't need to argue, confront, or shout. Her silence, combined with her strategic preparations, carried more weight than any argument. Later that evening, David approached her. "Mom, they don't suspect a thing," he whispered. "You've got the upper hand." Margaret nodded, sipping her tea. "Patience, David. The storm is coming." Unbeknownst to Laura, Margaret had also quietly documented instances of the daughter-in-law's cruelty and negligence. These records, combined with the legal changes to her will, ensured that when the reveal came, it would be irrefutable and unforgettable. The twist was complete. The seemingly powerless grandmother was now quietly orchestrating a reversal of fortune that no one could contest. The stage was set, and all that remained was the perfect timing to deliver justice coldly. The day finally arrived. Margaret had invited her son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren over under the pretense of a casual family dinner. The house was warm and inviting, the table set elegantly, a subtle contrast to the tension she could sense in the room. Laura entered, her smile forced and brittle, pretending familiarity where there was none. Margaret greeted her politely, masking the satisfaction she felt bubbling beneath the surface. As they sat down for dinner, Margaret casually brought up her estate planning. "David, I wanted to make sure you understand my plans," she said, producing the neatly organized legal documents. Laura's brow furrowed. "Mom, why are we discussing this now?" David asked, equally tense. Margaret smiled gently. "I think it's important that everyone knows exactly where they stand, especially since I care about the children's future." She handed David the copies first, and then Laura glanced at hers. Her eyes widened as she realized the truth. She had been completely excluded from the will. Every asset, every property, every financial account was designated to Emily and Jacob. Laura had no legal claim, and the weight of Margaret's quiet revenge finally hit her. The room went silent. David looked at his mother, a mixture of awe and relief on his face. The children, sensing the tension, looked from Laura to Margaret, puzzled but innocent. Margaret spoke calmly, the voice steady and composed. "I've always loved you both, Emily and Jacob, and nothing will ever change that. But cruelty and exclusion have consequences. I hope you understand that the decisions I make are for the good of the family." Laura's lips parted, but no words came out. She realized that all the power she had tried to wield was gone, and the person she had underestimated, Margaret, was now fully in control. The dinner ended without argument, but the impact lingered. Laura left, humiliated but powerless, while Margaret stayed behind with her son and grandchildren, laughing gently, holding the children close. She had won, not through anger or aggression, but through patience, strategy, and quiet intelligence. As she watched Emily and Jacob play in the living room, Margaret felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She had protected her family, secured her grandchildren's future, and delivered justice in the coldest, cleanest way possible. That evening, as she poured herself a cup of tea by the fire, she whispered softly to herself, "Justice doesn't need to scream. It waits, and when it arrives, it speaks louder than any words ever could." Margaret knew one thing for certain. She would never be powerless again. If you love seeing justice served cold, hit that subscribe button.